Okay, good morning everyone. How you doing? Didn't have too good a time out on 6th Street last night? Good, well, my name's Simon Segars. I'm the CEO of ARM. It's great to be here in Austin. Once upon a time, a long time ago now, I lived in Austin, and it really is a great city, so it's good to be here, good to be back. What we're here to do today is talk a little bit about technology and about the impacts that it's having on society and on people. As you've probably noticed, the world is just full of smart technology. Every day there's more products, more gadgets out there you can go and buy. And at ARM, what we do is focus on the intelligence that's embedded in those devices. We spend our time working on those tiny computers that are putting intelligence in the things that you buy. And we work with semiconductor companies to embed that technology in chips. Those chips go into all those products. And this is leading to an explosion in computing power. Computers you can think of as big things that sit on the desk or sit in a data center, but they're everywhere. They're tiny things which can be embedded in concrete, they can be embedded in sensors, light bulbs. Computers are going anywhere and everywhere. And that is really quite a phenomenal effect. This distribution of intelligence, the gathering of data, what it can do is truly spectacular. And it's leading to changes in the way that we work. Now, ordinarily at conferences, as a tech CEO, I'm talking about microprocessors and bits and bytes and technology and stuff. And as fascinating as all that is, I spend my days thinking about all of that. Today, as I said, we're here to talk about that more human side of how we interact with technology. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Dr. Mary Aiken, or Mary, as I know her, who is a cyber-psychologist and spends her time studying how people interact with technology and the effects that has. Now, when I first met Mary, I'd never met anyone before who was a cyber-psychologist, and it seems that most people don't know what one of those is. And I did hear somebody say recently, is that kind of a made-up job title, which I can assure you it is not. But Mary, why don't you describe what you do?
So, cyber-psychology, so I'm a cyber behavioral scientist. Cyber-psychology is the study of the impact of technology on human behavior. So as a discipline, it's part of applied psychology, and it's about 20 years old as a discipline, sort of mirroring the growth and penetration of the net. And effectively, my specialist area is forensic cyber-psychology. So forensic cyber-psychology is the study of deviant, criminal, and abnormal behavior online. So these days, I'm kept pretty busy. So basically, I've been involved in a dozen different research silos, everything from cyber babies, the impact of technology on the developing child, through to cyberchondria, which is a form of hypochondria manifested online. So when you've got a headache and you sit down and you start Googling symptoms and you start reading about brain tumor and give yourself like an anxiety attack as a result? So that's cyberchondria, and that's facilitated by the way the information is served in terms of the algorithmic structure that underlies search for health-related content online. So that's it. So today, as Simon says, we're going to be talking about factoring really the human into the equation in this context.
Great. So, ordinarily I spend my time talking about the positive benefits of technology. And I truly believe we're living in a golden age of technology. We're seeing all the time these new devices, new ways of doing things, and disruption caused by companies forming around technologies and products and producing apps for phones, and it's changing the way that we live our lives. The smartphone really is at the center of a lot of this disruption. Having in your pocket what a few years ago was considered a supercomputer with constant connectivity across a high-performance network has just changed the way we live our lives. The smartphones have become essential devices. They have just radically changed the way we interact together. Applications like Uber have come along, things like Airbnb, And these are devices, these are apps that really just didn't exist a few years ago, and have changed a lot about just how we access services. This smartphone has become this kind of universal remote control through which you live your life. It's changed a lot about trust as well. If you think about Uber, some person drives up in their car that's their own car, and you just happily jump in the back of it, completely trusting the person who's going to be driving it. Airbnb, I personally never stayed in an Airbnb, but I know lots of people have, and you turn up to somebody's house and stay in it, and people are very trusting in doing that. On the other side, modern technology has changed the way we consume news. It's changed what we consider reliable. So there's been a kind of opposite side of the whole trust equation that's come from that. But without a doubt, the smartphone, the technology we live with every day, has become a huge convenience, and we just couldn't live without it. There's some concept, and I'm sure Mary will know what the name of it is, where however many dollars you paid for your smartphone, I would have to give you much more before you would part with it. Its value to you is worth more than just the mechanical cost of it, because we just can't live without these devices. So, Mary, that impact of just this dependence on technology, I find really interesting. I know it's an area that you've looked at.
Yeah, I think the thing is that from a human perspective, the evolution of technology versus human evolution, the speed of the evolution of technology, it's sort of blindsided the human population in terms of trying to keep up with that change. And for me as a cyber psychologist, my job is to provide insight at that intersection between humans and technology so that we can learn to grow well with it. We want to avoid the construct of moral panic. Every new technology, when in primitive times, primitive man lifted up a slate and started scratching on it, that was the new technology of writing. And there was a moral panic because it felt that the great tradition of the Homeric odes would be lost. And they were right. Everything changed. And as every new technology is introduced, there's that really uncomfortable period where people get into a panic. And I think that's because they don't understand what the impact might be, and therefore they fear that. So for us, the challenge is to add explanatory value. This is why things can go wrong, and more importantly, this is what we can do about it.
Great. There we go. So, when you think about all the changes that have gone on to lead to the technology of today, that really is just the beginning. I think it's when we look ahead that things get really, really exciting. We are heading into a world of big data, massive data, a world of AI, and that I think is really exciting and can lead to some of the concerns that Mary was just describing. I was just at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, and that is a show which historically has focused on mobile phones, smartphones. You go there now, and you can be forgiven for thinking it's a car show or it's an IoT show. Really what it's about is the evolution of the network that is allowing connected devices to come together. With the rollout of 5G, we'll have much higher bandwidths. We'll be able to support way more things connected simultaneously, and they'll be able to access data with much lower latency, and that is going to change things yet again. It's going to lead to a world where those tiny intelligent devices I described at the beginning are connected constantly, gathering information about what is going on, and computing, be it at the edge, in the network, in the cloud, is going to try and deduce what's going on around you so that you don't have to. And that's going to lead to really some quite significant changes. A lot of those changes, I believe, are going to be for the better. All of that ambient intelligence that we can gather is going to lead to greater efficiencies in the supply of food, the use of resources like water and electricity, and deal with the side effects that come from mass urbanization as more and more people come and live in cities. I mean, even in my time coming to Austin, the population's grown enormously, the number of hotels has gone up, traffic has got worse. I noticed you put a toll road on somewhere I was driving last night. Didn't exist when I lived here, and these are technologies which are introduced to deal with the fact that just more and more people live in cities. So there's more of that to come. It's going to lead to advances in healthcare, which are, again, all for the better as we get older and we start suffering from chronic illnesses. So I believe this world of AI is going to lead to better quantity of life, better quality of life, and is going to be, generally a good thing for society. Now, these technologies that we experience today kind of look like science fiction from when I was growing up. And when I was at elementary school, the $6 Million Man, I've got to say most of you in the audience look too young to remember that, but I can tell you it was a really popular show. And when I was growing up, the thought of bionic arms and legs and eyesight and everything seemed fantastic, and it made for great entertainment. But of course, today that's become a reality. People are being helped through intelligent prosthetics, which can link into the nervous system. The deaf are now able to hear through cochlear implants. The blind are being able to see through various implants that are being developed. So that science fiction has become science fact. Now, a few years later, Knight Rider, with all its kitschiness, again, a very popular show, showing off what looked like complete, science fiction. When are we going to have cars that drive themselves, or you can call them up and it will come and get you, and you can have a conversation with it? But of course, we are doing that today. It won't be too long before you call up an Uber and there's no driver in it. You have a conversation with your car about what you want it to do. It takes you somewhere. It comes and gets you afterwards. So science fiction definitely becoming science fact. So when I was a kid, all of this stuff seemed fantastical. I've kind of got used to it today, and my expectations on what's to come, has kind of changed. So we like going off and finding out, talking to people about their alternate views of what technology is going to bring, and particularly the ideas from children we find particularly fascinating in ARM. So we went off a little while ago and went and interviewed a bunch of kids about their view of what technology can bring, and I think you're going to find it really interesting.
I think that imagination is just your vision of things that could be.
Oh, imagination means, anything can happen if you want it.
You can think of something, and you can kind of like build it out in your mind, and then you can try it. If it works, then it can like possibly be a big thing and help like people's lives.
Everything would have a specific teleportation address, and maybe you would have like an armband where you input the teleportation address, and then it would turn you into data, send you up to the cloud, deliver you to where you want to go, and output you as you.
I think if my house could paint itself every day, I would tell it to paint itself a different color, matching the mood of that day.
When you think about what you want to say, then it'll just write it down for you. Like if you were thinking of an image or something, it would just be there.
Some scientist could make something that you strap to your head and projects your dream.
I think things in the future could have feelings.
The cans of food that you're gonna have makes it and cooks it by itself.
If you're going somewhere and you're not supposed to go, the robot's arm will get you.
You could cloud hop.
No, I think if we look at it from different angles, all we can do is just, have that light bulb and, help you invent something, because anything is possible if you really, really, really try.
All right, so I've got to say, I love the concepts that come out of that video and these ideas that kids come up with. There's this kind of unencumbered view of the future. Kids don't know what isn't possible, and so they don't let it bog them down. And some of that may happen. I've got to say, having spent about half my day at SFO yesterday, delayed through weather, that whole kind of teleportation thing would have come in really handy. probably not going to happen. But however this pans out, it is going to be really interesting, and things we consider today and see on TV as science fiction are going to become the fact of the future. And it's because of the huge advances that are happening all the time in this world of technology. Now, as a technologist, as I said earlier, I usually spend my time at conferences talking about the benefits of tech, all the upsides that come from it. And I've been lucky enough to have a front row seat in the advance of mobile technology, from the first digital phones through the smartphone era, and seen all the benefits that brings. And I get to marvel every day at new applications, new use cases that come from this open platform that so many people can go and innovate on top of. It's been a phenomenal factor in our lives. Yeah, but there are some unintended consequences, some side effects that have come from this, which nobody thought of. In the early days of smartphones, we used to sit around in the office thinking about streaming video and video chat and all these things. It's going to be great. Nobody thought that you'd walk into a restaurant, and this was probably a scene that was not too far from anywhere you were last night, where suddenly people aren't talking to each other. They're all staring at their screens when they could be having a conversation. Nobody really thought about that. But Mary's been studying this and thinking about it a lot, so please give us your perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, when I was walking over from the hotel, like twice people walked into me because they were following their app. They're just crashing into each other on the pavements. But I think, for 400,000 people to come here this week and actually visit this event, that's, to me, is the perfect meeting point of online connectivity reinforced by real-world connectivity. I mean, as humans, this is what we do best, reading each other's facial expressions, being in each other's company. And we don't want to lose that. So we want technology and our experience to augment that and not take away from it. The thing about the internet is that if we think about the internet as a sort of a superhighway, in Europe, the EU, which is our sort of, governing body in Europe, conceptualizes the internet as an infrastructure, sort of like a motorway or a canal or a railroad. I think that we have to have a sort of a paradigm shift in how we conceptualize the internet, because it's anything but an infrastructure. It is an entity that has the ability to have a profound and pervasive impact on human behavior. So an impact in terms of the individual, so the cyber-psychology of the individual, an impact in terms of sociology, how we interact as a group in technology-mediated environments, and an impact in terms of a developmental impact. So Simon and I, we're sort of done, we're cooked. In terms of development, not a lot is going to happen. It's just not going to change that much. But for kids, for young people, they will be impacted by technology. And it's not standing, alone. It's constantly shifting sands of, as the technology is developing, as kids are being born, as they're engaging with newer and newer iterations of technology, that in turn will impact on human behavior. So we have to understand these changes in terms of basic principles, and we have to understand how they impact on us as individuals and how they impact on society. So a good friend of mine at MIT, Sxsw, has just published the work of his doctoral thesis, which he studied for, or undertook his doctoral research over an 8-9 year period. And he started it back in the early, well, it would have been sort of 2012, 2013, when I first was talking to him about his research. And he said, I'm going to look at how rumors spread on social media platforms. I'm going to look at Twitter, I'm going to look at Facebook, and I'm going to look at rumors. And I'm going to look at this thing which he described to me as fake news. And everybody was like, can that happen? Okay, so here we are. And his research is just being published, so I'd highly recommend that you have a look at it. It's how does fake news travel online? And what's fascinating is that his study pointed to the fact, do you know, in the audience here, who do you think would be most responsible for actually perpetuating and spreading fake news online? AI systems or humans? Take a guess. Humans, very good, very good. So humans actually are to blame, really, if you want to apportion blame, for how fake news travels online. And that in itself, while Sxsw pointed to his findings, he didn't do, because he's not a cognitive or behavioral scientist, he didn't do a deep dive into human factors behind how fake news travels. And in the absence of research at the moment investigating that, you know, we know in traditional psychology, the work of Seligman, that as humans, we have an innate fear of spiders and an innate fear of snakes that is sort of hardwired. Psychologists don't like talking about hardwiring, but yeah, hardwired into our systems. And it may be that things that we fear or rumors or things that we're worried about, that this is actually sort of a primitive defense mechanism. I better click on the worst case scenario. As we say in forensics, start at the apocalypse and work back. So it may actually be a human protective mechanism, and I think that would be just a fascinating area of research to provide explanatory value for fake news.
Yeah, fascinating. So, and you raise an interesting point. You know, your colleague's been studying that for years, yet the technology moves really, really fast, and it's evolving faster, really, than it's possible to analyze. You know, I like to consider myself fairly up on the modern trends of technology, and then I watch my kids using their devices, and I'm thinking, well, what's that you're using? And it's some app that I haven't come across before, which is pretty scary. But again, this is all based on the technologies, you know, of today. We are heading to a world of AI. And before we get into that, I think it is worth taking a moment to reflect on where we are today, thinking about you know, what we can learn from the last 10, 15 years of technology development, especially with respect to its impact on children. So as parents, I'm a parent, I've got 3 kids, you know, today as a parent, you're raising a digital native. Right? My kids haven't lived, or one of them has, but generally speaking, my kids haven't lived in a world without Google and broadband and access to the world's information at their fingertips. And it, you know, really changes how they go about their lives. One of my colleagues in the office, as we were talking about these issues the other day, was saying that she'd been at home and something went wrong with the TV. And her kids instantly said, "Hey, Alexa, can you fix the TV?" Now that's fascinating. That was the first reaction they had. There is this reliance on technology, which as a parent, you kind of step back and go, wow, that's really unusual. You know, I'm looking at wires in the back of the TV. So it's just changed. And this is all, you know, at one level, it's all great. You know, the fact that your kids can get access to all this information instantly, they don't have to leaf through encyclopedias and get big, heavy dictionaries down to look things up. It's just there at your fingertips, is going to allow them to go faster, to learn faster, to, you know, stand on the shoulders of everyone that's gone before in a much more easy way, which creates a huge opportunity. But on the other side, it does introduce kids to risks. And you know, again, one of the jobs as a parent is to, you know, raise your kids to be aware of the risks that they're subjected to. But usually and historically, you've done that from experience. You know, growing up, you've got used to knowing, you know, who you can trust, who you can't trust. But as everybody moves online, and you can't see your kids' circle of friends because they're out there in cyberspace somewhere, and they might not have met them all anyway, it's really hard to kind of keep an eye on that and to understand those risks that your kids are being exposed to, because as adults, we haven't been there ourselves. So it's a very different place to be. So, you know, we think about this implication for Gen Z, Generation Z, kids that are coming through now using technology, and think about the risks they're exposed to. We want them to have a really positive relationship with technology. Technology is getting really complex, you know, way more complex than most people can understand. But we need kids growing up to have a positive relationship with the technology itself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think the point is that this is a very technology is very powerful in terms of what, in HCI, human-computer interaction, what we call persuasive design. So I think there's a sort of an ethical balance in terms of, we want to design technologies that amplify what it is to be human. So we don't want technology to actually tap into our psychological Achilles heel to diminish us rather than make us better. The reason that you constantly check your phone and check your devices is, in the behavioral sciences, what we call variable ratio and intermittent reinforcement aspects of technology. So what does that mean?
Did you get that? There's a quiz at the end.
It means that, that your relationship with technology can be like a slot machine. Every so often you get that text that you've been waiting for, you get that connection that you've been waiting for, you get that great email from your boss. So basically, that is far more compulsive and compelling than if every communication was good or every communication was bad. So that's a very human entity, but what we don't want to do is to exploit that. And we certainly don't want to exploit that for kids. And if you think about our devices, they are designed to get your attention, sort of what we call signaling theory in animal species. They will, alerts will in an auditory context get your attention. Lights flashing, that's visual signal theory. Vibration, that's another form of signaling theory. All we need for our devices to start is for them to start emitting pheromones, and then they'll really get our attention. The point is that, controlling that, and particularly when it comes to the developing child. So unfortunately, what we're seeing, an increase in anxiety and depression in young people. We've seen a 70% increase in anxiety and depression over the last 25 years. We're seeing problems in and around self-esteem. We're seeing problems in and around self-perception. And, we're seeing a whole generation that as they go through that, we all remember what it was like to be 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. This is a difficult developmental period. And you're trying to figure out who you are, trying to establish your sense of self. Now, can you imagine trying to do that as a young person now, where the self is an artifact that is being curated online, this highly manipulated entity that is one thing on Snapchat and something else on Instagram and something else on Facebook. Can you imagine trying to juggle all those virtual selves? And now factor in, the connectivity afforded by social media platforms in a positive way, but also the negativity of trying to manage thousands of people within your network. That's challenging for an adult. That is extremely difficult for a young person who's trying to figure out who they are. So I think that, I think that actually maybe the anxiety and depression, and again, we don't have the studies yet to support this, but I think that it is strongly correlated with sleep deprivation. So we know that 3 in 5 young people wake up during the night to check their social media alerts to see what has happened and status updates. And that sleep interruption, we know that sleep deprivation is correlated with anxiety and depression. So it may not actually be the social media platforms per se, but it may be the curation of self in a cyber context that is actually leading to the depression, anxiety manifested in the studies. So this is where, I suppose from the behavioral sciences point of view, we can't wait for the longitudinal studies, the decade or 15-year-long studies. What we have to do as scientists, as behavioral scientists, is stop metaphorically sitting on the fence waiting for these studies and actually just step up and say something and get involved and look at actually addressing these issues.
Okay. So in order to address those issues, at ARM, this is something that we really care about because it's important to us. We really want to see the benefits of technology come to pass. But that will only happen if people trust it, and if some of the issues Mary was just describing, and we don't want to sit here as a bunch of doomsday merchants, but some of these issues get in the way of trust, then the benefits that will come from a world of AI and sensing and big data, I think is going to be delayed, postponed, may never happen, and that would be a tragedy because, frankly, the way in which we're using the planet's resources, we're absolutely going to need that. So we want to take some action in ARM, and today we're launching an initiative around these themes to engage young people in a conversation about their expectations around technology, what it can do, what it can't do, and how they should have a healthy relationship with it. We're going to go into some more detail about that later on. But before that, we thought we'd just talk a little bit about some of the issues in a little bit more detail, how we can guide people through to minimize the negatives and get all the benefits out of the positives. So we really need to be thinking about setting a right example. I'm sure you've all seen scenes like this, which is a little bit of a shock at times, and certainly since I first met Mary, I've become much more sensitive to seeing people's kind of obsessions with their screens. But Mary, please.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke earlier about the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they've come out with guidelines for kids and screen time. And basically, 18 months, a child under the age of 18 months should not be exposed to screen time, any screen time, not television, not iPads, not certainly not smartphones. So basically, and then they give recommendations to how to introduce your child to technology in an age-appropriate way, which is very positive. And effectively, it's not just when people ask me about, well, what's the best age to introduce my child to technology, I turn the question around and say, well, actually, what's the best age to introduce your child to your use of technology? So the average adult looks at their phone about 200 times a day. They touch it around 2,500 times a day. And the point is that if you're the parent or a caregiver to a young child, then that's 200 times that you haven't looked at them and 2,500 times that you haven't touched them. And that's problematic for us as a species. There is no study that does not support a baby's need for FaceTime. And I don't mean the app sort, I mean eye contact. So it's very important for us to think about this in terms of in a developmental context, and it's very important for us in terms of how do we get the best out of technology. I'm absolutely pro-technology. As a cyber-psychologist, I could not do my job without spending a disproportionate amount of my time online. In fact, I once took the test for internet addiction. There's an internet addiction scale, and I just have to admit my name is Mary, and I'm I got a terrible score. But it's a pause, to actually reflect on, as adults, our use of technology and what we do with it.
So really, a relationship with existing technology can improve, and that's before we get into this world of AI. As Mary says, the kids learn from the examples that we set, and don't get me wrong, we're not here to give lectures on parenting. I mean, who is perfect? Let's face it. But I would encourage you just to do a bit of people watching. Watch how people interact with technology. Watch how young kids particularly can just spend hours and hours staring at that small screen. It really is quite illuminating. It just does make you think about it. Hence, technology companies, technologists often talk about the glory that is these fantastic features that they're bringing to market. We very strongly believe that needs to be done in a human-centered way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, is it a matter of time before, parents ask Siri, hey, what am I going to do with this, with my child? I mean, the point is that it's constantly changing. And what we want to do, and I suppose the behavioral sciences, to a certain extent, have been blindsided by rapid evolutions in technology. I mean, I studied psychology back in the day, and when I first came across AI, I thought, wow, this is incredible, but almost simultaneously realized that nothing in my training at that point could equip me to understand the impact of this on human behavior. So I went back to requalify. And I think maybe that's what's missing in the equation is how do behavioral scientists help the tech companies to get the best out of technology in terms of how humans interface with technology. And the thing about technology is technology in itself is not good or bad. It is either used well or poorly by humans. And I suppose that's what we're trying to get to, is how do we get the best out of it? And also, how do we avoid the sort of the moral panics, the headlines that make scare stories, you know, in terms of autonomous vehicles are going to take over and everybody's going to lose their jobs? Well, there's another way of looking at that. It may be in, you know, a couple of decades' time that the very act of a human driving a vehicle will be seen as an act of gross irresponsibility. I mean, if you can eliminate drunk driving and text driving and falling asleep at the wheel, you're doing pretty well in terms of advances for society.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something like 30,000 deaths on the road every year just in the United States, and something like 90, I can't remember the exact stat, but something like 96%, something like that, are caused by human error. So if you want to improve safety, you know, as an engineer, I was taught to debug things, look for the common causes. Well, there you go. Take the human out of the loop. That will make a radical difference to safety. And you know, that's an example of AI, which is coming to us. The advances in AI over the last few years have been phenomenal. We were discussing last night about how AI was, you know, really a big subject in the 60s and 70s, and then it kind of died down when nobody thought they could actually ever bring this to reality. But it's suddenly come back in a big way. And it's come through the ability to just gather data and crunch through it, and algorithms that have been developed to analyze this mass of data. But we really are just getting started with that. Now, as Mary said, AI, though, should be a positive. There's lots of headlines. It's great for journalists to write about how everyone's job's going to be taken away, how you'll get kidnapped by your car. But AI really should be about enhancing human capability. It shouldn't be about replacing it. There's a theory called the Moravec paradox, which says that computers are really good at things that humans are bad at, and vice versa. And the things that computers find really hard to do are the things that, as humans, we've spent the longest time through evolution developing to be really good at. So analyzing body language, analyzing whether someone's upset or you know, what their facial expression is saying, these are things which you know, were once human survival skills, and millions of years later, we're really good at doing those. Things like maths and science, you know, we can do. These are new things, evolutionarily speaking, and computers are really good at doing that. So the best comes when you can put these two things together, and AI should really enhance human capability in that way. If you take healthcare, for example, already computers are being used to analyze scans and look at data, and that to me sounds great. I want that. I want to go to a hospital that is using the latest technology to analyze data, look for patterns over long periods of time, compare me against you know, every other person that's ever lived, and extract information. A human couldn't possibly do that.
You may not get a good result, Simon.
Well, yeah, maybe, but I'd still rather have that than somebody going, you know, I haven't slept for the last 18 hours, and you know, take 2 aspirins and go home. So, you know, this mix, I think is going to be really, really powerful.
And I think the thing about, you know, when we talk about artificial intelligence, and it's the idea of sort of replicating human intelligence or replacing human intelligence. Well, this is simply not true. You know, as a behavioral scientist, I can tell you that our community of scientists, we barely understand how the human brain works. Okay, it is the most sophisticated entity. The premise that we can actually build something to replace or replicate something that we don't understand is a flawed construct. So in terms of this replacing, I'm not somebody who believes in that. I prefer to consider this the power of not artificial intelligence, but IA, intelligence augmentation. And if you go back to the work of Licklider in 1960, he wrote a brilliant paper called Man, Computer,